because we're ready to be a $100 million company, not a couple $1 million.
So the type of mentoring that you're talking about for these young developing scientists or engineers turned CEOs is exactly the kind of value-added service that a lot of entrepreneurs, I find, are looking for in their investor partners. And sometimes they get it, and sometimes they don't. Do you guys have any sense of maybe you guys do it a lot, but what proportion of the investment community is prepared to do that and not? Okay.
It's a size problem, right?
How many can you manage?
How many can you manage? And also, what's the what's the return on your investment of your time as a venture capitalist? These are small companies with high risk. Obviously, look, if we knew there were going to be some Googles in there, we would spend a hell of a lot of time on it. But the bottom line is we want to. I think all of us, particularly people who've seen how mentorship can be successful, want to give back. But I think that we're all juggling, 10 different investments and all these different companies. Where it works best is when you actually have a program that's geared to actually creating that mentorship. We created a program called TechStars out in Colorado, which is now in Seattle and Boston and New York City, which basically creates it's a boot camp kind of thing, but it's basically people compete from around the country to come to our program. And they get 12 weeks of intense mentorship, connections with VCs. It's really sort of built on itself now, and it's one of, if not the leading sort of incubators in the country. It's focused on technology companies, particularly though in the internet digital space. So you have very low startup costs, but people who come are people who code. These are people who are really technologists, right? They're not necessarily business people. They get matched with business people. They learn. Maybe they'll add someone to their team who has that business or marketing experience, depending upon what company that it is. But that's what we've seen, sort of a targeted, organized mentorship way, because it's a community asset, that mentorship. That helps drive the next generation. So I think what Accelerate Long Island needs to do, and what those of us who are involved in are talking about, is creating that dedicated mentorship role, which will attract entrepreneurs to our Long Island, because we have, in certain areas, real strong mentors of people who've been doing business, like Steve, and like Bill, and like John, on the science side. So I think it needs to be organized, and I think that the good news is that that's high on the list for Accelerate Long Island.
Well, that's good, and we find that the best feedback that we get as an organization is from the coaching that we provide. We heard a number of references today to the way we've coached these presenters today to make their presentations, and over the years, that's some of the feedback that we get, that boy, they really need that, and if they got nothing else out of presenting, that coaching is invaluable.
Well, how do you make a presentation in 8 minutes? I bet you
You
most
have
of
to
the
think
people
clearly.
here could talk for a half hour about the thing and get into all sorts of nuances. How do you direct that to the broader audience who wants to hear what pain problem are you solving, how are you doing it, what's your timetable, what capital needs are, etc.
And that's exactly why
something you provide is huge.
That's exactly why we limit it to 8 minutes and never allow longer. And sometimes we cut it to 7. Maybe we should have done that today because we're running over a few minutes. Now, how do you guys feel when a company comes to you and says, okay, we're at an early stage and we're looking to raise some amount of money, and we know we're going to have to hire, a sales guy, a CFO, that other expertise that we've been talking about mentoring into the founders. Are you comfortable funding that kind of payroll, at this level?
I mean, generally, it depends on the company. It depends on the stage of the company and what they're up to. It's pretty rare for a startup to need a CFO that's really a CFO. They need a bookkeeper. They need someone to keep track of the records, and someone can fill that in part-time, or their local accountant can handle the stuff. Salesman is generally one of the last things I worry about, because when you're ready to start selling, really, with a professional sales staff, you're pretty far along with where you are. And generally, the CEO, if it's one of these passionate people, is your star salesperson anyway. That should be their role. They're not supposed to be in the lab doing science. Their main thing is to go out and convert the world to their religion. That's their purpose. The fact that you have to hire a salesperson means you're already over the hump of those first things. The CEO is now so busy running the business that you need professional sales staff. So I generally am reluctant to fund sales at an early stage, because it generally doesn't fit. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but generally the companies that we see at an early stage are nowhere near ready to fund a real marketing effort. It's premature.
Okay, questions? Look, Walter?
So let's talk about structuring a deal from the very start. Both John and I and our respective teams deal with this all the time. Finding that right interaction and looking at what's the right balance between an equity structure that really makes sense, so that as you look also at maybe royalties and other consideration as part of this total package, that you have the interests aligned, and that you're not going to grow a company with a lot of hair on it. You can have clean downstream investments. Talk to us about the process. And in particular, Dave, Steve, Bill, you've seen things kind of come and grow, and if you're looking at a manufacturing type of a company that's going to have the requirements for capital infusion and sort of really build products, it's not like the internet startups that you've been talking about and the types of things, Dave, that come through TechStart. So talk to us about deal structure and getting them right for a deal. So Steve, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. As with all the things we've been commenting on, it depends on the company, it depends on the stage. If you're starting with something right out of a lab, and it's literally out of a lab. So one of the differences between the Brookhaven and our Ford Long Island institutions, hopefully Hofstra will join that list soon, is that we know money has actually already been spent. It just hasn't been our money. So it's different than when an entrepreneur has got an internet idea, it's a germ of an idea, he spent $10 on it at his home, or he borrowed some family money. But it hasn't been that millions have been spent to this on the last 5 years, coming from all sorts of government grants, and now we're ready to commercialize. So to think of, from our perspective, that this is we'll give them $1 million for half the company, nobody's going to be naive about it. There's a value coming to the first stage, even though it's still in the lab and needs to come out. So we're generally amenable to talking about piece of the company, royalties for the intellectual property being licensed by the institution, and as long as the scientists are reasonable, so that they don't think they have to own 80% of the company and their company's worth $50 million the day that they come to us, then you end up with a reasonable deal. I think you have to always put in perspective what a VC needs to be able to see over time. So if he can't see 10x shot, not that he's going to guarantee, but if he can't see that that there's a chance for him to make 10 times his money over some long period of time, I'll give him 5-7 years, not even 2-3 years, but a reasonable life of a company, then it just doesn't work for him to spend the time to invest in the company. So if the valuations start working up high, and you multiply them by 10, you say, is this a $500 million company? This could be a very nice $50 million company, but it is no way it's a $1 billion company. The numbers just have to work. But it always starts with what's been the invested capital real, not the idea of what business people think, but what has actually gone into the business. Has it been well spent, or has it been wasted? Sometimes, okay, it was a big learning experience, but the $10 million you spent is only worth 2. That's where you are, but you at least spend 2. You at least spend 10. So when you're starting the valuation discussion, you've got your first foot on the ground. You have a starting point. Sometimes you're going into a company that's still at an early stage, like something that's doing a drug. You just know that they need $50 million in this round, and they're going to need another 50 very soon. So you have to plan out what the stages look like, and can a deal structure really work? As long as everybody is reasonable, you figure this out. This is actually not the hardest part. It's actually one of the easiest parts, as long as everybody is rational. And if you see somebody isn't rational, you're out of it before you get started. So it's actually a pretty easy line to draw.
The reality is maybe Steve will disagree with me. There's no way you can put a valuation on these companies.
It's all random.
Very simple. Can't. You know, what's the comparable? What is it? Steve said they put $2 million in, that's a starting point. And where did you get to with that $2 million? And what's the next piece? How are we gonna get to that? What is that gonna take? Then the next piece. We're going through it right now with this company that I described earlier. What's the valuation? We believe you can justify a certain number. The entrepreneur doesn't believe it. So we're not going to argue with them. We said, okay, you want to give up more of your company, that's fine. It's hard to, at this stage, it's whatever you can cut a deal on.
The market has two players. However you want to negotiate that. I do think that in these, the capital allocation piece from the venture side is very important. Where am I, you know, I have $1 million to invest, or $10 million to invest. Where am I going to get the best return for my investors and for myself? You know, at the end of the day, you know, things that are more capital, and I think it's one of the reasons we've seen a lot of the VC money going to these internet stuff, because my money goes a long way in internet stuff. You know, $1 million into an internet company, they can do stuff for a couple of years, and you know, especially now as the server costs have come down and all that stuff. You compare that to a biotech company, that might get you about 2 weeks, right? So the return, obviously, you play in a lot bigger field in that case, and that's why you're interested. But you are very valuation sensitive, I think. And one of the interesting things I think is at that point in the company's life, the valuation curve is very steep. So small advances, you know, in time and activity start really driving things up. But are you here or are you here? In which case, it's, you know, the valuation can change quite a bit. But that's one reason for an early stage capital investor, what we're trying to do with the Emerging Technologies Fund, and what the Venture Capital Fund did before us was try to take it from that low level and with small infusions of capital go up that curve, which is somewhat asymptotic at that early stage.
I think that one thing that you have to keep in mind from our side is that we don't want to disincent the inventors and the founders. So it doesn't serve us any purpose to end up with some hardline deal that gives us 80% of the company for a couple $1 million, and then the inventors are saying, so why am I working? Why am I doing this? So I think we're incented to come up with a deal that works. And valuation, there's no analytical way of coming up with a valuation. All you have is a lot of factors, a seat of your pants, and the people to see if you can come up with something rational. So you know your $5 million is not worth 2% of the company. But on the other hand, if I take 80, what's the point? I know that down the road these guys are gone, and I've incented nothing. So everybody's got to have their stake. Everybody's got to have their interests aligned, whether it's the institution, the investors, or the founders.
So valuation is far more art than science. Go ahead,
May I
Bill.
leave, please? I'm running out of time.
Oh, if you're out of time? Yes, sure. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Bill. Yeah, Bill's on a tight timetable today, and we're running a few minutes late. So, are there any further questions from the audience? Any of the presenting companies?